tonight, and I'm very proud of you for being here and being part of an organization that promotes you going further than what is required of you, and that puts you in a position of really taking advantage of the opportunities that are available to people who do go further than what's required of them. And so I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you, and I see a number of familiar faces out there, people who've been in my classes before, who I still talk about for their accomplishments and for the experience that I had with them, and so I'm appreciative of that as well. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to show you a little visual here just to start things off on a comedic note. This is Minimum Wage Barbie, as you can see, and basic idea is that she's saying, you know, girls, if you don't study, this is what you can look forward to, and, you know, Deadbeat Ken is sold separately and things like that. So this is basically the narrative that you're getting. It's not just for girls, obviously this is targeted mostly at girls, but the idea being that if you get more information, if you get more studying, if you get more education, that things are going to go better for you. And the only challenge that we have with that is that there's kind of an inherent promise there that doesn't always follow up with, and it's going to take a lot of hard work. And that is the part that gets left out a lot of times. So I wanted to start with this just for you to have a chance to settle into the whole comedic aspect of the thing. All right, so I want to share with you, it happened on the 31st of October, and it was grisly and gruesome and ghastly and was fitting for All Hallows Eve. It was totally unexpected. It came out of nowhere. We weren't prepared. It caught us off guard. And it's still a little hard to talk about, frankly. But on Halloween this year, a day reserved for innocent children and candy and harmless pranks and slutty Snow White costumes, Kim Kardashian walked into the Los Angeles County Courthouse and filed for divorce from her beloved companion of 72 days, Kris Humphries. And thus ended one of the great love stories of our time. And don't pretend that you don't know who Kim Kardashian is. I know you're all smart and everything, but don't try to up your nerd cred by pretending you don't know who she is. You're college students. You deal with dumb, beautiful people all the time, and she is their queen. Okay? So you might ask me, at this point, how do I know all these details about the Kardashian-Humphries exchange, hereafter referred to as the incident? Am I a family member? Perhaps a close family friend who is privy to all the private legal paperwork? Shockingly, no. Truly, to learn the intimate and inane details of the incident, all I had to have, or you had to have, or Chihuahuas had to have, for that matter, was a pulse and 2 ears. Okay? In fact, so utterly inescapable was information about the incident, which I will now stop referring to as the incident, that the AP printed a small blurb that on the 1st of November, so the next day, it's estimated that up to 90% of all Twitter traffic had something to do with things that are Kardashian related. 90%. Let me put that in perspective for you, smart people, okay? 90% is like tweets of A. Okay? A's worth of tweets. That's assuming that we're using a 10% grading scale and there are no pluses and minuses like here at U College. Okay? So 90% of the Twitter traffic was about something Kardashian related. With all the politics in the world and all the revolutionary things going on in the world, 90% of that day's text had something to do with Kardashians. Oh my God. Right? So, what does that have to do with us? What does that have to do with tonight? What does that have to do with you, with the future, any of those things? Well, I'm going to tell you. According to the theme, democratization of information, power, promise, and peril, information, who has it, who uses it, how it's disseminated, where it originates, is the name of the game for you right now. And, let's face it, really for the rest of your lives. And mine too. Okay? 2 things particularly influenced my presentation tonight. One of them is that perhaps you're mostly aware, I was not, that the Phi Theta Kappa chapter of Butte College is referred to as Beta Theta Kappa, which means that it shares initials BTK with a very famous Wichita, Kansas serial killer. So if you get an email from BTK, you read it, okay? You pay attention. Secondly, when Dee originally approached me about speaking tonight, she told me the topic, and then I immediately, forgetting that I have the attention span of like a gnat, didn't write it down. And so I misremembered it as democratization of information, power, promise, or peril? Question mark. Which meant that I was supposed to come here and settle the whole debate definitively with my sharp acumen about which one of those things dissemination of information is, right? Democratization of information. And those of you who know me, my former students and people who know me in other contexts, know that like taking a stand, hardline stand on something and then vigorously defending it just isn't my style. I don't really even have an end to that sentence because I thought there would be lots of guffawing laughter of derision because that is so not true. Okay, so I really am that person, but I felt I was up to the task, but I was kind of terrified by it. So then, thankfully for all of us, I got the follow-up email from the always on the ball Dee that it was democratization of information, power, promise, and peril, which indicates that it's some combination of all of those things. And luckily for you, there's a time limit, and I'm a speech teacher, so I'm kind of a time limit, let's say, zealot. And so I'm going to stick with that. And I'm going to leave you some things to think about, but obviously I can't cover the whole entire thing. It's too huge. Okay? All right, so I have to give a preview. All the people that have been my students know that that's the thing that you have to do now, okay? So I'm going to give you a preview. First thing I'm going to talk about are definitions of terms, because anytime we have any topic discussion, we have to decide together what we're talking about, okay? Secondly, I'm going to talk about some factors which are real influential in the dissemination of information process. And then finally, I'm going to look at the 3 Ps, the power, promise, peril part of the sub-theme of tonight's thing that we're looking at. Okay? So that's where I'm going to go. And I also might at some point have to check my phone for late breaking news about famous people who are famous for being famous. So I can share it with you. I'll let you know. Alright, so being an old school debate wonk from long ago and far away, have to start every discussion with a definition of terms. We have to start there because then we all know what we're talking about, okay? And by we, I mean me. I'm using the royal we. So, let's start at the very beginning. Take that, Julie Andrews. Democratization. It is noteworthy to notice that when I was researching democratization, there's hardly any, in fact, almost no mention of the word democratization without a political context, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, it is something that we have to be aware of. That really, when we talk about the political is personal, it also turns out that information is political. And so that is something that we need to know and keep in mind when we talk about spreading information to a more mainstream group of people. That everything is politically based, maybe not specific party politically based, but that there is political ramification and charge to it. And that's important to know. Sorry, okay, so I started my process of looking. I thought, well, I'm going to look up democratization of information, like information for everybody. I'm going to start on Wikipedia, right? Of course I would, because that's the premier, the ultimate, like, everybody gets involved in the information sharing process site, right? Ironically enough, when I typed in democratization of information, it told me that page does not exist yet, but you're welcome to start it. And so it was kind of like this weird Wikipedia version of surreal, trippy, like, who's on first? Wikipedia version, right? It was like, who owns the information? No one. Who adds the information? Everyone. Who moderates the information? Someone. So no one owns the information? Exactly. Right? And you're like, So I'm looking for information that's compiled by the general masses, but the information site that compiles information by the general masses doesn't have anything about compiling information by the masses. What? Okay, so I did the one definition that I did find was that basically it is the idea that common people have access to information rather than it being in the hands of just an elite group like clerics or academics. That was not as helpful as I might wish, because it didn't give me what I needed and didn't give me a broad enough view of what I wanted to talk about. So at the site's suggestion, I linked to democratization of knowledge. And there was tons more stuff there, and I hit pay dirt, right? Everything I could ever use. Anything I could use it tonight, anything I could use in my classrooms, if, for instance, I ever started discussing political topics in my classes, which I would never do, okay? And so the problem with it was one thing, and that was that meant that I had to essentially equate knowledge and information, which I was not comfortable doing, and which I'm sure you are also not comfortable doing, because to have information about something is not the same thing as to have knowledge, and you know this instinctively, even if you've never, taken the moment to think about it. And I'll give you an example of knowledge and information being different things. I know you're going to be shocked by this, I'm not a caffeine drinker, which means I don't drink coffee at all. Can you imagine if I did? Like, what would I be like, right? It might be like how Ritalin affects ADD kids, though, right? It might zen me out. Like, I might drink an espresso and just get in touch with the universe or something. But, so I have a friend who's a big coffee drinker, and she's a really good friend, and so we would take turns, of course, who buys the drinks, like, if we go through the drive-thru or something like that. But I don't know anything about coffee orders, and she has a very specific coffee order, which in my understanding is pretty much how coffee drinkers are, right? You guys are really anal about it. And so she has this very specific coffee order, and I only know that. I don't know anything about ordering coffee other than my friend's very specific order, which worked just fine at Java Detour in Chico. But then when I went on a trip with her to New York, I found that not everywhere does it the same, and that I'm going to have to be a lot more knowledgeable than I was. So we were staying in New York, and I was hoping that when I got up early one morning that I was going to sneak out and try to find Starbucks in Manhattan and get her coffee. Okay? So I stand online, which is apparently the New Yorker way of saying in line, which is the normal person way to say it. So I'm standing online, and this really brisk barista shouts out at me. He's like, "What's your order?" And I was like, and I started my spiel, my woefully inadequate Java Detour Chico spiel, right? And he stops me. He's like, "You want tall, double tall, or grande?" Like I did, that's all I got. And so I left with a completely wrong order, knowing very, very clearly that information and knowledge, two different things, right? I had information about her coffee order, but specific only to one place. I didn't know anything about ordering coffee in general. So we can't equate information and knowledge, and when we do, that's when we start to get in trouble. But I think that a good way to look at it is that information, once we take it and apply it somewhere, is knowledge. What we do with information is knowledge. So, and also, to go along with that, another example that goes along with that, the Surgeon General started requiring warnings on cigarette packages when? Anybody know? What year? What year did the Surgeon General start requiring warnings on cigarette packages? That's right, 1965. So that means that since 1965, since, before some of us, most of you were not even here yet, the Surgeon General has been putting stuff on the side of cigarette packages. Basically, you're just going to drop dead if you open this package, okay? You know this. You know that cigarette smoking can and will kill you. But there are 1.3 billion smokers in the world. 46 million of those smokers are in the United States, and 500,000 smokers in America died last year. That makes it it makes it 1/5 of all deaths in America are smoking related. And as many as AMA says that as many as 50% of people who smoke will die from something that has something to do with smoking. Right? But you know this. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. You know that cigarette smoking is bad for you. Everybody that puts a cigarette in their face knows it's bad for them. But we keep doing it. So obviously information and knowledge aren't necessarily the same thing. Okay? And on a lighter note, to go along with that, I'm going to tell you the top 5 most shoplifted American items last year in ascending order. Okay? They were Gillette Mach 5 razor refills, smartphones, electric tools, Jameson whiskey, and the #1 most shoplifted item, hold on one second, make sure I'm not lying to you, and the #1 most shoplifted item in America last year was filet mignon. Anybody have an idea what the most shoplifted item in the world is? Oh, that's a good one though. Cheese. Cheese. And it's mostly for resale. Isn't that weird? Like, you know, I gotta go to the store to go shop with some cheese so I can resell it on the black market. Okay? So now you know the top 5 most shoplifted items in ascending order in America last year. And if you ever win on Jeopardy, then you owe me a car. Okay? So now you see that there's information, tons of information, tons and tons of it, right? Some of it's useful, some of it's useless. Okay? But we've got plenty of information. So, what do we do with it, right? For the sake of brevity for this presentation, too late, I know, we're going to keep the definition of information down to the concise Merriam-Webster authoring of data, okay? So democratization basically means common people have access, it's not just a few people, and information, so far, data, all right? So common access to data. But now we've got to look at our P's, right? The power, promise, peril thing, okay? Promise has 2 applicable definitions here. One of them being a guarantee or an assurance, like on cop shows when the detectives promise the informants that their families will be safe and that they die in a fiery car bomb explosion, so no one should actually make or believe that promise anymore. Hey, I watched Law & Order, I know. So that's a guarantee or an assurance. Or the secondary definition is like good things to come, an indicator of good things to come. Like, we think that Junior's fire starting ability shows great promise for him as a go-getter, okay? So, things to start, things in the future, good things in the future, all right? So, assurance or guarantee, or good things coming in the future, okay? So then let's look at peril, okay? You think that's easy, right? Peril means danger. But it's interesting because it actually doesn't. It actually means to be exposed to risk or harm. So peril isn't danger, peril is to be exposed to danger, which sounds like a distinction without a difference, but it's going to matter later on, okay? So just keep that in your head. So peril is to be exposed to risk of danger or loss, or risk of harm or loss, okay? And then, finally, power. And the best definition of power that I know of is the one that's in the small group textbook that we use for VU College, and that's J. Dan Rothwell's textbook. And basically, the definition is, power is the ability to influence the attainment of goals sought by yourself or others. So the bottom line is, if I can keep someone, including me, from getting what they want, or help them get what they want, then I have power. Okay? So we've got all of our definition terms in there. So what's our total thing? All right, so we're truly talking about common access to data as a guarantee, a possibility for risk, and a conduit for goal attainment. And I'm glad I got that out of the way so my old high school speech and debate coach, when she dies someday, won't haunt me. Okay? All right. Well, at least for that. She might haunt me for other things. I don't know. Now, factors that commonly influence data, dissemination of data, okay, and access to data. I'm going to focus on the 3 that I think are the big dogs in this conversation. The development, or not, of technology in a society, the economic influence on information distribution, and the cultural issues that come along with information status quo change, okay? First, what happens in a society when technology gets developed and then those people in that society demand access to that information technology that only a few people controlled before? Okay? That's a tough one, right? Because people who are in control, the people who have the status quo on their side, don't like change. They like it to stay the way it is because that's good for them, right? There's a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel, and it was written by Jared Diamond, who's a social scientist, among other things. He's pretty amazing, and his stuff is really amazing if you ever get a chance to be exposed to it. And his basic idea was, why do Americans like travel to space, and people who live in like Myanmar still do subsistence farming with sticks, right? Like we're like all genetically the same. What happened that we have so much and they have so little? idea was that you have access to animals that can do work. You have access to protein, so you can get more thinking time and more thinking ability as opposed to subsistence ability, and a whole host of things. But the bottom line is, you're lucky. You just got lucky. You just got born in the right place with the right circumstances. So luck precedes technology. Okay? Creative thinking also has to precede technology, right? You all know that, like, in the beginning there was the Bible. Okay? Well, it's not actually the beginning of everything, but the beginning of, like, widespread literacy. We know, you all know, that the Gutenberg, the printing press got invented, and then that made it so that they could print stuff up in large quantities, and, like, everybody in the world had a Gutenberg Bible at their house. And so that changed lives. It changed literacy. It changed quality of life. It changed education. The printing press was technology that was creative. How can we make a bunch of written word at the same time, not just scribes sitting and writing it out? How can we do a whole bunch of the same writing at the same time? So that was creativity. So we've got luck. We've got creative innovation. And those things come together to make it so that technology arises. Okay? When Al Gore invented the internet, we can argue that that changed the world, right? And then also, without smartphone technology and social networking sites, this year's Arab Spring could never have happened, right? This is how people were able to, in a grassroots way, in a common people having the information kind of way, were able to connect with each other. And so technology existing and being invented in a society is a very important contributing factor. Secondly, we have how economics affect data transfer. Okay? If a society does not have access to technology because they have an inability to absorb the cost of that technology, they lose twice. They're in a double bind, right? Because not only do they not have the access to the technology which would help advance their quality of life, they also are up against societies that do. So they lose twice. And so the economics of a system or a society are very important in getting technology. Because the best technology in the world can exist, but if you don't have it and you can't afford it, or your society or your culture or your country or your town or whatever can't afford it, then you are not going to be able to take advantage of the benefits. And again, it's a problem because other people are taking advantage of it, which means that you fall further and further behind faster than ever before. All right, here's a question for you. And anybody who's my current student, you already heard me rant about this, so y'all just take your, just be by yourself for a second. And anybody else that read this or knows the answer to this, don't answer because I want people to guess, okay? The app Angry Birds. You know the app Angry Birds? Yes? Yeah, tell me that you do because I know y'all play it, okay? All right, so the app Angry Birds was first marketed in 2009, which means it's only 2 years old, right? That's a toddler. That's still like a tiny little baby. Some kids can't barely even talk yet when they're 2 years old, okay? And they still wear diapers. So it's a baby app. It's a very, very baby app, okay? So how much time do you think, and this is in years, how much time do you think that the combined total of the whole world playing Angry Birds, how much time in years do you think that Angry Birds has been played in the last 2 years? How many years do you think total it's been played?
4,000 years.
Keep going.
Over 1 million?
Not 1 million, but you're right, 200,000. That's right, 200,000 years. The world has played a combined total of 200,000 years of Angry Birds in 2 years. And 70% of the world's population does not have access to the technology to play it. That means 30% of the world's population has played 200,000 years of Angry Birds. Oh my gosh, right? That illustrates, in a comic way, but illustrates the giant divide between people who've got the technology and the ability to afford it and the people who don't. Right? If you can sit and play a year's worth of Angry Birds on your phone, you have a very different life than somebody in Africa who spends 85% of their day trying to get enough water and food and fuel. Right? You have a very different life. Okay. So the bottom line is that money equals access to technology, which equals a different access to information and the benefits that it brings. That's all there is to it. Okay? And then finally, the influence of culture. Now, you know how much culture influences marital customs, politics, all kinds of things, right? Even dress and food. You know that. But I think one of the biggest places that culture has influence is information dissemination, gathering, possession, and validating. Okay? The bottom line is that he, and overwhelmingly across the world, it's still he who controls the information controls everything. Okay? And so those are three very, very influential factors in information dissemination. Okay, so let's take a look at our sub-themes, okay? Our three sub-themes. And with your indulgence, I'm gonna switch the order just a little bit, or at least the order as I perceived it. I'm gonna talk about promise first, and then I'm gonna talk about peril in the middle, so I can sandwich it. You know that sandwich technique where you're supposed to do two positive things with the negative thing in the middle? Okay, so promise, peril in the middle to ease the sting, and then I'm gonna talk about power, because I think arguably power and the information, the power that comes from information is probably the most stunning thing of this whole conversation. And so that's what I'm going to end on. All right, so first of all, let's start with promise, okay? Let's use the definition where we talk about promise as the predictor of good things to come in the future. Not just like an arrangement that we've made between us or a guarantee, but let's talk about good things in the future, okay? I'm going to tell you a story that involves two men, one of which you know, and one of which you're going to know, and he's going to be a new acquaintance for you, and you're just going to love him, okay? And they converge in a place that's very dear to me, okay? All right, so Bill Gates, you know him, right? That's the guy you know. He discovered, well, not discovered, he realized long ago, long ago, when he was first doing this whole gonna explode, take over the world thing, that he was on the cutting edge of a technology that absolutely was going to change the world. But he also was bright enough and foresightful enough to know that that change was also going to potentially leave a whole lot of people behind. And so he started this program really quietly at first, so quietly that people just really didn't even hear about it unless they were really trying to hear about it. And it was basically, you know, it kind of bridged into computers for classrooms, but it started out with, this was over 20 years ago, that providing computers and computer equipment to rural places, to rural and impoverished places. Sometimes they're the same thing, sometimes not. And so one of those places, one of those very rural places without access to very much technology is Lynchburg, Tennessee, which, yes, is where they make Jack Daniels. Okay? And which also, until recently when I lost them, was home to my very dear grandparents. Now their daughter, my aunt, also lives in Lynchburg, and she was the county librarian for years and years, and it's a county that's only 5 miles from border to border. It's teeny, 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 tiny. It's also a dry county, so you can't buy Jack Daniels within the county, but fortunately you only have to drive about 5 miles to be able to buy it. She wanted her kids to have access to the information that the wealthier kids in wealthier areas had access to, but she couldn't because they had no money, right? They're a tiny, tiny, tiny little place and they have no money. And so enter the other guy in the story, who you don't know yet, but you'll like him. His name is Puss Burton. Okay? Now I'm certain that Puss was not his original given name, but it had changed so long ago to Puss that nobody could remember what it was originally, probably not even him. Now when you looked at Puss, he looked like somebody who would be from rural Tennessee. Okay? He wore raggedy overalls, and they were raggedy at the bottom, and worn boots, and a worn leather jacket, and a tattered hat, and he would sit and he would whittle outside my grandparents' general store on the square. Now, he looked like he belonged in rural Tennessee. What he didn't look like was a multimillionaire, which he also was. Okay? So he would keep a roll of 20s and 50s and 100s that was about this big around, and it just had a ratty rubber band around it. And he would keep it stuck in his overalls. Okay? He had no electricity at his home, despite having millions of dollars, and he had no indoor plumbing, because he didn't see why you have to do your darn business in the house. Okay? Dirt floors. And this is how he chose to live his life, because he's like, you know, I'm a simple person and that's what I do, okay? But he was very, very generous. And so he was willing to help my aunt get what she needed. And so Bill Gates was willing to help my aunt get what she needed. Puss Burton was willing to help my aunt get what she needed. So combined, they helped my aunt get enough computer equipment that she turned her tiny little tiny town library into one of the most advanced rural libraries in the entire country. And that was through the help and generosity of two men who wanted to see that promise come to be. as far as getting access to information at an early age so that that promise would fulfill itself. Okay? Secondly, let's take a look at peril. Okay? Remember we, and I'm using the royal we determined that peril is to be put at risk. And with that in mind, let's talk about another guy, Private First Class Bradley Manning. Anybody know why we know him? He's of WikiLeaks fame, infamy, whatever, okay? And regardless how you personally feel about what happened and the information he let go and whether he should or shouldn't or any of those things, regardless of how you feel about that, we can all agree that information getting out to the public domain was the bulk of this discussion, okay? And this is one of the things that is so interesting, but also that has a warning inherent in it, that information, how we get it and what we do with it now becomes a huge responsibility, because he now has 22 counts against him, including one count of aiding the enemy, which is a capital count, which means that he qualifies for the death penalty, right? And so he's 23 years old, and he, disseminated this information because he felt it should be out there. And again, however you feel about how that situation went, he had information, it got out in the public domain. And Ella Nukakowa of the Washington Post, she wrote an article on Bradley Manning, and she said that this raises a number of disturbing issues, but the most disturbing issue that it raises is that dissemination of information into the public domain has never before been considered a capital case aiding the enemy issue. And so this is the first time that that particular offense has been what it is in Bradley Manning's case. Now, obviously, spies and espionage and things like that, there's a lot of different definitions, but the basic idea being that what we do with information that we get, we need to be aware of those things. I don't think you're going to end up in jail necessarily, but information is very important, and what we do with it is also something we need to keep in mind. And then, again, what we do with information is applying information that we've learned is knowledge, okay? But sometimes we even work against ourselves instinctively, like at a base, animal brain level, okay? Evolution, whether you believe in Big Bang versus creation, all of those things. Let's leave that aside for a moment. But everyone agrees that to some extent humans evolve, right? We've gotten taller, things like that. Okay? So even if you don't believe in it originally, we're still changing as we go. Okay? And one of the changes that we haven't made as a species is to deal with the aging process. We're not genetically living longer, which you would think would be the case, right? The people who are more suited to living a long time would win out. They would be dominant, but they're not. And the interesting question, and this was posited on a TED conversation, TED, right? The whole technology big deal thing. I want to get his name right. Hold on one second. Anurag Reddy, on a TED conversation, posited this question: why hasn't evolution dealt with the aging process? And the answer is really simple and really weird. We traded instinctively at a cellular level, at an animal brain level, we traded longevity for procreation. Because we're a not made for life species, which means that we spend tons of energy during our fertile times hooking up, right? And because we have to make the species go on. And that takes years off of our life. You know this, right? You've been in the dating world, okay? It takes years and years and years off of our life. It takes a tremendous toll on our bodies. So we literally traded longevity for procreation, which supports the theory that I've long had a suspicion that it's more advantageous to be good looking than to be smart, right? So we wanted more of us, not necessarily smarter or longer living of us. So sometimes we even work against ourselves at a base level. Okay? And finally, let's talk about power. Okay? In our theoretical anchor, power is undeniable that the access to information, to more people, to more information, leads to advancement, success, and a whole bunch of other goodies, right? Good things. More people getting more information is going to lead to good things, okay?
And I agree with that. But it doesn't always manifest itself in the way that we think that it will. Those of us who have careers in education, and those of you who are thinking about going into careers of education, we're at a really weird crossroads time. And I've had this said to me by plenty of my peers lately in the last couple of years, that the students that we're getting now are different than any students that we've ever had before, ever. I've been teaching for 18 years, and so I've had almost a whole generation of flux of students, and I've never seen the kinds of students that I see now. They're coming to us very different, and that means that we, as the people who help them get access to information to up their power quotient, have to be different as well. And that's been kind of hard, because some of us are kind of like dinosaurs. We're like technology dinosaurs, kind of. I am anyway. I've sent maybe 24 texts in my entire life, and they are all to my children, and they were all painstaking, like half-hour-long texts, and then they get responded to with a simple letter or acronym that I don't understand. Okay? So they say that knowledge is power, okay? And we've got to be different now to reach this new generation, to give them the information that will help them have knowledge. Okay, so they need information. Let's talk about a specific example. Teen pregnancy in this country, off the charts, rampant. It's an epidemic, okay? Except for 2 years in the intervening time. In the last about 40 years, it has just been exponentially getting higher, okay? And it's a problem, and we know it's a problem. So we try to address it as educators, right? What do we do? What do we do? How do we address teen pregnancy issues? Sex ed classes and condoms on bananas and stuff like that, right? That's how we're going to solve the problem, okay? And so that's how we decide that we're going to solve the problem. However, we got a new group coming up. We got a new crop coming up. That's just not going to work. That's just not going to be their thing. That's just not going to be their deal. Okay? They're not going to listen. They're not going to imprint the same way that generations before them have. Okay? So, enter MTV's 16 and Pregnant. Okay? You know this show? Have you seen this show? You know this show? People freaked out, especially old people like over 40, like me, just freaked out over the show that it takes 16-year-old girls who were, like 16 at the time that they got pregnant, and follows them through their late pregnancy and the delivery of their baby. And so people just tripped out, and they're like, it glorifies these girls, and it makes this problem not seem such a big deal, and it minimizes the risks, and I mean, you're like, we shouldn't have it alone, and whatever. But here's the thing. They did a recent survey, a recent study, of a really pretty big sample of young people, so it was pretty statistically significant. And they asked these young people, these teenagers, if they'd ever seen an episode of 16 and Pregnant. And 7 out of 10 of the kids that they talked to said that they had seen at least one episode of MTV's 16 and Pregnant. Which is not a big deal, right? We all watch 1 million hours of television, okay. But the significant thing was that 6 out of 10 of those kids who said that they'd seen an episode also said that they had talked to a parent or some other adult about what they saw on the show. Do you think kids are coming home from sex ed condom on banana classes and talking to their parents 6 out of 10 times? Not likely, right? So, there's something there, right? There's something there. At least the information got imparted, and now the information is being discussed. So even though for some of us, especially those of us who have 16-year-olds, we freak out, okay? We have to learn a different way, and if we're getting the information across, and then they can use that information for knowledge, and then that knowledge leads to them being empowered, maybe it's something to consider, right? And so, but it's still kind of scary. The power potential is there. It's just going to take some creative and innovative and different new thinking to unlock it. So finally, to wrap it all up, we're very fortunate to live in a place where we can, at a time, where we can talk about information and who gets it and who deserves it and who should have access to it. We're very fortunate in that. You, all of you, are the front lines for protecting freedom of information. And I want you to know that you are our best and first and last line of defense against information staying in the hands of just the elite. And I want to leave you with this. Help us, Phi Theta Kappa. You're our only hope. And I have to go teach a class, so I'm going to run out on you.